Is there a sound lonelier than your own voice echoing back at you in the dead of night? Imagine that night stretches on, not for hours, but for days, weeks, maybe forever. And imagine that echo is all you have left of the world you knew. Are you listening closely? Because in the silence, there are whispers. And in the darkness, things move. This is the story of Bunker Delta 17. The red light on the console blinked, a rhythmic pulse in the oppressive dark of the control room. For Sergeant Alex Ryder, each flash was a stark reminder of his isolation, a tiny, angry eye staring back at him from the abyss. Hours bled into days, and the blinking never stopped, a relentless metronome counting down what? Hope? Despair? Alex wasn't sure anymore. His voice, when he used it, felt foreign, hollow, as if it belonged to someone else, someone lost in the static-laced airwaves. "This is Sergeant Alex Ryder," he'd repeat, his voice cracking slightly, a tremor of exhaustion and something deeper, something akin to terror, creeping into his tone. Assigned to Bunker Station Delta 17, broadcasting on all available frequencies. If anyone is out there, anyone at all, please respond. Silence. Only the hum of the generator, a constant, rattling whine that vibrated through the metal floor and into his bones, answered him. The official channels had gone dark 5 days ago, maybe 6. Time had become a fluid, meaningless thing in the bunker's depths. His last order, a cold, emotionless text message flashed across his comm screen, haunted him. Stand by. Situation evolves. Evolves into what? Into this echoing tune? He kept broadcasting, a futile act of defiance against the silence, against the growing certainty that no one was listening. But still he spoke. For them, and for himself. "I hope this broadcast finds someone," he murmured into the microphone, the words catching in his throat. "Anyone who's still out there. So you know, you're not alone. And maybe I'll feel less alone too." Day 1, as the news channels had so casually termed it, the zombie outbreak. Zombie. The word felt ripped from a bad movie script. Absurd, unbelievable. Yet, here they were, buried deep beneath the earth, while the unbelievable unfolded above. It had started subtly, almost dismissively. The news anchors, their faces carefully composed, had reported an unidentified illness spreading in several regions. Quarantines were mentioned, of course, in hushed, almost reassuring tones. Remain calm, they'd urged, their smiles strained. Everything is under control. In Bunker Delta 17, their initial orders were equally procedural. Stand by. Remain calm. Be prepared to relay further instructions. It felt like a drill, another exercise in emergency protocols. They tested radio frequencies, meticulously inventoried their rations, performed routine maintenance checks on the massive steel doors. The bunker itself was unremarkable, functional. A central control room dominated by the blinking console, Spartan barracks for 12, a small, sterile medical bay, a supplies area stocked with enough provisions for months, and the heavy, steel entrance, secured by 2 colossal hinges. The generator, their lifeline, throbbed with unreliable energy, promising power and threatening failure in equal measure. Alex had been on shift with Corporal Evelyn Hayes and Private Ben Carter. At first, they treated it all with a nervous levity. "Another drill," Ben had joked, adjusting his headset. "Or maybe they just want us out of the barracks for a bit." Evelyn, ever pragmatic, had just shaken her head, but a faint smile had played on her lips. "We'll be topside soon enough." None of them had grasped the speed, the sheer, brutal velocity with which the world outside was collapsing. 3 days after the first vague news reports, the orders shifted, the tone turning sharp, desperate. A scrambled broadcast crackled through the comms, a field commander's voice strained, almost breaking. "Bunker Delta 17, do you read? Do you read? The infection, it's spreading, casualties, high, requesting immediate lockdown protocol. Prepare for potential infiltration." The voice dissolved into a burst of static, swallowed by the electronic ether. They tried to hail him back, to get a location, any scrap of information, but only the hiss of emptiness answered. Then, the bunker entrance slammed shut with a deafening clang, the sound reverberating through the metal corridors, setting their teeth on edge. Automated security protocol. That was the moment, Alex realized, the moment the game ended, the moment reality fractured. The perimeter cameras, cycled through on a small, grainy monitor, showed figures gathering outside the chain-link fence surrounding the facility. Some stumbled, limbs moving at unnatural angles. Others ran with a jerky, desperate urgency. Most just milled about, heads tilted at odd angles, disoriented, lost. Then, the feed cut out, the screen dissolving into snow. No one spoke for a long moment. They just stared at each other, the silence in the control room thick, suffocating, broken only by the generator's relentless whine. The world, their world, had just ended, and they were trapped in the tomb of its aftermath. In the days that followed, they clung to routine, to structure, to the illusion of control. That's what training hammered into you. Keep calm. Follow procedure. Stick to a schedule. 7 a.m. Wake up. 7:30. Breakfast rations, eaten in strained silence around the metal table in the barracks. 8 a.m. Check external sensors. Test radio communications, each attempt ending in the same desolate static. 9 a.m. Inspect generator, fuel supply, the ever-present fear of power loss hanging over them. 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Rotating shifts, a monotonous cycle of rest, forced exercise in the cramped barracks, and tense, strained overwatch on the dead perimeter cameras. They repeated these steps day in, day out, a hollow ritual in a world that had ceased to exist. Even without contact from above, the routine felt like a fragile anchor, a way to pretend they still had purpose. But the silence from the outside was deafening, absolute. Scanning frequencies yielded nothing but static. Occasionally, a faint burst of crackle would flicker across the speakers, teasing them with the ghost of a voice, but always fading, always just static. Corporal Hayes, usually so stoic, tried to inject some optimism into the oppressive atmosphere. "Maybe they got it under control up there," she'd say, forcing a smile that never quite reached her usually sharp, intelligent eyes. "We'll get a call soon. Just hang tight." But even her voice lacked conviction. One evening, as they were settling into their bunks, a new sound pierced the silence. A soft, scraping noise, emanating from the thick metal door at the end of the corridor. The blood drained from Alex's face. They all froze, every muscle tense. For a long, agonizing half-hour, no one moved, no one spoke. They just listened to the scraping, a slow, deliberate drag against the steel, occasionally punctuated by muffled thuds, as if something was pressing against the door, testing its strength. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Private Carter, his face pale, grabbed his rifle, a tremor in his hands. He crept down the corridor, a shadow moving in the dim emergency lighting. He pressed his ear against the cold metal of the door, holding his breath. Nothing. Silence again, heavier now, laced with a new, chilling layer of unease. They checked the security feed from the small external camera near the entrance, their hearts pounding against their ribs. The camera showed only partial darkness, broken by the flickering overhead lamp, casting long, distorted shadows. No movement. They tried to rationalize it. Debris, maybe. Or an animal, somehow trapped near the entrance. But deep down, a cold dread settled in their guts. They knew it wasn't debris. It wasn't an animal. 2 days later, a new crisis emerged. The water pressure began to fluctuate, sputtering and spitting in the taps. The generator's power output dipped erratically, causing the lights to flicker and dim, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in the periphery of their vision. The bunker was designed for independent operation, but only if the maintenance crews on the outside could periodically restock the fuel tanks. Now, rationing became a necessity, a grim calculation of dwindling resources. They shut off lights in unused corridors, plunging sections of the bunker into complete darkness, a darkness that seemed to press in on them, to suffocate the air. Non-essential equipment was powered down, further silencing the already tomb-like bunker. But the dwindling supplies were only part of the problem. Morale plummeted. With the world above seemingly gone, every conversation turned dark, circling around the same unspoken fears. Evelyn tried to maintain a semblance of cheer, but even her forced optimism sounded hollow. Ben retreated into himself, growing quieter, more withdrawn. He spent hours in the hallway by the door, listening, always listening for sounds from the other side. Sometimes, Alex heard him whispering to himself, a low, desperate mantra. We can't be alone down here. We can't be alone. Alex buried himself in his role as radio operator, a futile quest for connection in a silent world. He scanned every frequency he could find, obsessively twisting the dials, searching for any sign of life. Every so often, a faint crackle would trick him, his heart leaping with a surge of false hope, thinking, "This is it. Someone is finally speaking." But always, it dissolved into static, into nothing. It felt like standing in a vast, lightless room, desperately jabbing at a broken light switch, praying for illumination that would never come. On what Alex believed was their 12th day in lockdown, time had lost all meaning, days blurring into an indistinguishable mass. He picked up something strange, a whisper in the static, on an old military frequency. Faint, almost inaudible, a ghost in the machine. If anyone listening, help. Then, silence again, swallowed by the void. Alex shouted, adrenaline surging through him. "Evelyn, Ben, come here now." His hands fumbled with the dials, desperately trying to lock onto the frequency to transmit. "This is Delta 17. We read you. Please repeat." Please. Nothing. Only the ceaseless static, mocking his desperation. He spent hours that night, replaying the short burst of audio, straining to decipher any detail. A man's voice. A woman's? Were they close? Distant? He couldn't tell. But it was something. A flicker of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Someone was still out there. The next night, the scraping returned. Louder this time, more insistent. Alex was on watch when it started, a slow, repetitive drag across the steel, sending shivers down his spine. Evelyn and Ben were in the control room in seconds, their faces etched with fear. They checked the external camera again. For a moment, Alex thought it was broken or covered in dust. But then he saw it. A hand, pressed against the lens, smudging the view, obscuring the already dim image. A figure stood in front of the door, staring directly into the camera, into them. They couldn't see a face, only the ragged outline of a tattered uniform, the unsettling tilt of a head. Ben grabbed his rifle, his voice tight with a strange, desperate conviction. "We should let them in," he insisted. "That could be one of ours." Evelyn hesitated, her brow furrowed with worry. "We have orders to maintain quarantine, Ben. We don't know if they're infected." The hand slid down the camera lens, leaving a long, greasy streak across the blurry image. They watched the figure slump, then vanish off to the side, disappearing from the narrow camera's view. But the scraping continued, a relentless, maddening sound that drilled into their minds. Then, as before, just as suddenly, it stopped. No one slept well that night. The next few days were a tense, fragile charade. They tried to pretend the encounter hadn't happened, to bury the fear under the weight of routine. They stuck to their schedule, but it felt increasingly hollow, devoid of purpose. The supply inventory, meticulously checked and rechecked, was still decent, enough for several weeks, if they continued to ration. But the real worries were water and power, the fundamental pillars of their fragile existence. The generator coughed and sputtered more frequently, making ominous noises, as if it might give out at any moment, plunging them into irreversible darkness. Evelyn suggested a controlled generator reset, a risky procedure that would require shutting everything down for a short period. They hated the idea of being without lights, air filtration, communications, even for a few minutes, but they agreed, grudgingly, that it was necessary. It was a gamble, but staying on their current course felt like a slow, inevitable slide into oblivion. They planned to do it first thing in the morning. That morning, the air in the bunker was thick with tension, heavy with unspoken anxieties. They flipped the main breakers, plunging the control room into total darkness. The silence was oppressive, absolute, broken only by the sound of their own breathing, ragged and shallow in the stale air. Even though it lasted mere minutes, the darkness stretched on, an eternity of suffocating silence. When the lights flickered back on, weak and wavering at first, then strengthening, Alex felt a profound sense of relief, a physical loosening of the knot of dread in his chest. He hurried to the console, reactivating the radio, frantically scanning for signals. At first, everything was routine, static on every channel, no discernible changes. Then, the motion sensor alert flashed red, a jarring burst of color in the dim control room. They checked the hallway camera near the door, their hearts pounding in unison. 2 figures stood there this time. Both wore tattered, stained uniforms. One reached up to the camera lens again, the same gesture, as if they knew, somehow, that they were being watched. Evelyn breathed out, a choked sound. "They're wearing our insignia." Alex squinted at the grainy feed, his stomach clenching. He couldn't be sure through the static-filled image, but a hollow chill spread through him. They braced for more scraping, more pounding, but instead, they heard something else. Voices, faint, muffled, as if carried through a vent, or a crack in the bunker structure, impossibly thin. Hushed conversation, indiscernible words, a low murmur that sent a fresh wave of unease washing over them. Ben pressed his ear against the corridor wall, his eyes wide, almost frantic. "They're talking," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They're trying to talk to us." Panic flared, sharp and sudden. Should they open the door? Should they retreat deeper into the bunker, barricade themselves in the barracks? Wait for what? Rescue? A miracle? Evelyn tried to hail them on the external intercom, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to remain calm. "This is Bunker Delta 17. If you can understand me, please identify yourselves." No response on the speaker. Only the faint, unsettling voices continued beyond the steel door, too soft, too distorted for them to understand. That night, as the whispers echoed beyond the walls, Alex picked up another broadcast, even fainter than the last, almost swallowed by the static. "Extraction, not safe. Hold out, as long, can." The transmission broke up, fractured syllables lost in the hiss. Alex repeated the words into his microphone, his voice trembling with a desperate hope. "Say again, please. This is Sergeant Alex Ryder at Delta 17. We need assistance." Over. No reply. Silence. Had he imagined it? Or had whoever sent that message lost power, lost contact, or something worse? Still, he clung to those broken syllables, to that fragile thread of hope. Extraction. There was some hope, right? There had to be. The next morning, Ben marched to the door, his face set, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "I'm opening it," he announced, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "They might be from command. Survivors. We can't just leave them out there." Evelyn and Alex argued, their voices rising in the confined space of the control room. They pointed out the potential danger of infection, the strict orders to remain sealed, the terrifying possibility of losing the bunker entirely if they let the outside in. But Ben wouldn't listen. He was fixated, driven by a desperate need for human contact. Any contact, in this suffocating isolation. He said he could at least speak with them through the partial locking mechanism in the anteroom. Against their better judgment, fueled by a sliver of shared desperation and a growing fear of what was already outside, they agreed on a compromise. They would open the inner door of the 2-door system, keeping the outer door sealed. Ben could attempt communication in the small, contained space between. If the unknown individuals seemed safe, whatever that meant anymore, they could reevaluate. Alex used the manual override, his hand trembling on the control panel. The inner door, thick steel groaning and protesting, slid open, revealing a dimly lit chamber, the anteroom. The outer door remained locked, a solid barrier against the unknown terrors outside. But through the reinforced viewport in the outer door, they could see 2 silhouettes, pressed against the metal, almost fused to it. Ben called out, his voice echoing in the narrow chamber, a mix of hope and trepidation. "Identify yourselves." The silhouettes reacted, shifting, twitching, as if they heard him, as if his words carried meaning in whatever broken world they inhabited. One of them seemed to mouth words, indistinct, unintelligible, pressed against the viewport. They heard nothing through the reinforced door. Then, with startling, unnatural speed, the silhouettes began pounding on the metal, their movements jerky, frantic, desperate, or something far worse. Ben stumbled back, his face ashen, his earlier resolve shattered. "Close it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Close it now." Alex slammed the override switch, his hands slick with sweat. The inner door groaned shut, sealing them back in, locking them away from whatever was on the other side. For hours, the pounding on the outer door echoed through the bunker, a relentless, rhythmic drumming of terror. Then, slowly, agonizingly, it stopped. After that, Ben hardly spoke, retreating further into silence, haunted by what he had seen, by what he had almost unleashed. Evelyn became even more diligent, rechecking systems, triple-checking ration counts, throwing herself into the routine with a grim, almost frantic energy. She no longer joked about going home soon. Alex could see the fear in her eyes, a silent, unspoken acceptance that this might be their new reality, forever. Time blurred again, days indistinguishable from nights. They attempted to maintain their schedule, but each passing day felt heavier, more pointless. The lights flickered more often, the generator sputtering and groaning with increasing frequency. Every beep from the bunker sensors, every creak of the metal walls, made them jump, their nerves frayed, stretched to breaking point. No further signals came in through the radio, just the endless, maddening static, a never-ending hiss that filled the silence. They took turns sleeping in the control room, huddled together, unwilling to stray too far from each other, from the fragile illusion of safety in numbers. None of them wanted to be alone, not anymore, not in this tomb. Eventually, inevitably, the generator's condition became critical. One evening, the lights dimmed, so low they could barely see each other's faces, ghostly outlines in the near darkness. The fan slowed, the air growing thick, stale, heavy with the scent of dust and fear. They scrambled to keep power going, rerouting what little fuel they had left, but their efforts felt futile, desperate delaying tactics in the face of an inevitable end. They were running on borrowed time, and they all knew it. At that same moment, a piercing alarm beeped on the console, a frantic, insistent shriek in the dim control room. Exterior tampering. They switched on the external cameras, their hands shaking. The lens was covered, obscured by something, wet, sticky. Then they saw them. Multiple hands. Not just two, but many, pressing, clawing, smearing the camera lens, obscuring the view. Silhouettes moved around the entrance, a swarm of them, their forms indistinct in the darkness. The pounding returned, steady, methodical, relentless, as if they were trying to break through, to tear down the steel walls of their prison. That night, Alex made another broadcast, his voice trembling, barely above a whisper, but he tried to maintain a semblance of professional calm. "This is Sergeant Alex Ryder of Bunker Delta 17, he choked out, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Our power is nearly depleted. We have limited rations. If anyone is out there, we request instructions, assistance, or any confirmation of activity. Please respond." He repeated variations of that message for what felt like hours, pouring his desperation, his dwindling hope, into the silent airwaves. But the radio remained silent, a cold, indifferent void. A creeping dread settled in his mind, heavy, suffocating. They were alone, truly, utterly alone. The next day, driven by a desperate impulse, by a flicker of something akin to hope, Ben discovered a small hatch in the maintenance corridor. According to the faded bunker schematic, it led to an underground service route, perhaps designed for emergency repairs to power lines, or a hidden supply pathway. Evelyn and Ben debated, their voices hushed, strained. Some part of them, the rational part, the fear-driven part, dreaded what they might find down there, fearing it might lead to a worse fate, to an unknown, potentially more dangerous part of the bunker system. Another part, the desperate, clinging to any possibility part, felt it was their only chance to escape, their only hope if the main door was compromised. In the end, fear won. They sealed the hatch from their side, bolting it shut, heavy steel against the unknown darkness below. They told themselves they still had a chance to be rescued here, in the known, however terrifying, confines of the bunker. Leaving felt like an even greater gamble, a leap into a deeper, more profound darkness. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a fatal mistake, that by staying put, they were choosing a slow, agonizing death over the slim chance of escape. On what Alex believed was their 20th, or maybe 30th day, time was a meaningless blur now. He caught one final burst of radio chatter. It was garbled beyond recognition, static-ridden, fractured, but there were words in it. Faint whispers carried on the electronic wind. Someone was definitely speaking. He caught only two phrases before the transmission cut out completely, swallowed by the static. Containment breach. Bravo sector. Lost all units. Retrieve. No further contact. Then, silence. Absolute, Final silence. It sounded like all hope of containment had failed. If Bravo sector was gone, that likely meant the entire network of bunkers, of supposed safe zones, was compromised. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to run. As the days crawled by, agonizingly slow, the scraping, pounding, and whispering around the bunker walls grew more frequent, more insistent, more organized. It was as if more of them had gathered, drawn by some unseen signal, all trying to get in, to breach their sanctuary. Sometimes, they heard them right behind the steel of the main door, a relentless, rhythmic drumming. Sometimes, around the ventilation shafts, a soft, unsettling rustling. Once or twice, in the dead of night, it sounded like they were trying to speak actual words, but the tones were strange, guttural, unsettling, twisted parodies of human speech. Ben, his eyes hollowed, his face gaunt, began to talk about going outside again, a desperate, suicidal mission to secure the perimeter, a meaningless gesture in the face of the overwhelming unknown. Evelyn, her voice weary, reminded him that they had no idea how many were out there, what they were facing. Their cameras showed only shadows, fleeting glimpses of tattered uniforms, horrifyingly quick movements, tireless, relentless returns. They had all witnessed the hand against the camera lens, the unnatural speed, the chilling persistence. The generator coughed, sputtered, and failed more often. The lights flickered so frequently now that sometimes Alex couldn't tell if he was staring into his own hollow reflection in the darkness, or if he was seeing movement in the corners of his vision, shapes shifting in the periphery, just beyond the edge of perception. His breath felt heavy in the stale, recycled air, each inhale a struggle. Evelyn, ever practical, ever resourceful, tried to set up a manual crank for the radio system, a desperate attempt to maintain at least some form of communication after the generator finally died. But it was only a temporary, fragile solution, a band-aid on a gaping wound. Every time the lights went out completely, plunging the bunker's interior into absolute blackness, it felt like a descent into a living grave. They couldn't keep living like this, not indefinitely. Alex had been broadcasting as often as he could, pouring his story, their story, into the empty airwaves, a digital message in a bottle cast out into a silent, uncaring sea. He kept hoping, clinging to the faintest glimmer of possibility that someone, somewhere, would hear their call. But with each passing hour, that hope waned, flickering like the dying lights of the generator. Sometimes, in the suffocating silence, he wondered if anyone was even out there to listen now, if humanity itself had been swallowed by the darkness. As he dictated this message, his last desperate plea, the faint pounding on the door continued, a constant, unsettling rhythm that was becoming the soundtrack of their final days. It never truly went away. At times, it sounded like they were trying to speak, their guttural murmurs echoing through the steel. Alex wasn't sure he wanted to know what they were saying, or if they even understood them, the living remnants trapped inside this tomb. Evelyn was in the corridor, making another futile attempt to brace the door, wedging whatever scraps of metal she could find into the already reinforced frame. Ben was near the hatch, the sealed hatch leading to the unknown depths below, staring at it with a haunted, desperate gaze, like he was about to open it, to plunge into the darkness and never look back. Alex was at the console, broadcasting to whomever might still care, to the ghosts of the old world. Their supplies wouldn't last forever. The generator might fail any minute, plunging them into irreversible darkness. And the whispers outside, the whispers were growing louder. "If you're listening," he murmured into the microphone, his voice cracking, his spirit breaking. "If you're somehow picking up my voice, please stay safe. Use caution if you try to reach us. I can't promise you'll find anything but darkness and echoing halls when you arrive. But we're here, still holding on for now." No official rescue team had shown up, no new orders had come, and with each passing hour, the chance of a miracle faded, dissolving like smoke in the stale bunker air. But they weren't giving up. Not yet. Not while they still drew breath. "This is Sergeant Alex Ryder, Bunker Delta 17, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of the dying generator. "Signing off, at least until the next broadcast." The transmission ended. In the sudden quiet, the red light on the console flickered, then died, the last link to the outside world extinguished. The radio went still, silent. Faint footsteps echoed beyond the sealed corridor, joined by distant, halting voices, murmuring just beyond the steel walls. Whether they were friend or foe, savior or monster, remained unknown, lost in the echoing darkness. The only certainty was that Bunker Delta 17 still stood, hidden from the world above, waiting in the silence. Somewhere in the darkness, Sergeant Alex Ryder kept watch, listening, hoping for a sign, for a knock that wouldn't be followed by fear. Thank you for listening. If your heart raced even a little, be sure to like and subscribe for more eerie narratives. Your support is what keeps this channel alive. Until next time, stay vigilant. And remember, curiosity can be quite the companion, and sometimes a curse. This tale explores the deepest fears of isolation, the breakdown of civilization, and the terrifying unknown. It's a descent into darkness, both literal and metaphorical, highlighting the fragility of hope in the face of overwhelming despair. The unanswered questions: what are those things outside? What do they want? Leave a lingering sense of unease. The open ending emphasizes the uncertainty, leaving the listener stand and pondering the fate of Sergeant Ryder and his comrades. Did Bunker Delta 17 leave you breathless? If you want to know what happens next, if you dare to descend further into the darkness with Sergeant Ryder, let me know in the comments below. Like this video and subscribe for more chilling narratives. Your engagement fuels these tales, and who knows, maybe with enough support, we'll revisit Bunker Delta 17 and uncover the secrets that lurk just beyond those steel doors. What do you think is whispering outside? Let me know your theories.